Welcome to UBI Unplugged, breaking down the future of income.
All right, let's see if we can actually untangle this mess. UBI and global supply chains feels like trying to solve world hunger with a coupon for a pizza.
It's definitely a complex intersection, but I think it's worth exploring. The increasing fragility of global supply chains is becoming more apparent, and UBI could play a role, even if it's not a silver bullet.
Exactly. I see UBI as a crucial element in building resilience. Look at the news, India and Pakistan escalating tensions, potential trade wars, even Trump talking about tariffs on movies. These things directly impact supply chains, and UBI could be a buffer for people affected by those disruptions.
A buffer, sure, but a ridiculously expensive one. How are we going to pay for UBI when global trade is collapsing under the weight of tariffs and geopolitical instability? Wouldn't that money be better spent directly addressing the supply chain issues?
That's the big question, isn't it? Funding is always the sticking point. But think about it this way. If people have a basic income, they're less reliant on specific jobs tied to those vulnerable supply chains. They might be more willing to retrain, to start local businesses, contributing to a more diversified, resilient economy. It could foster localized production.
Yes, and we're not just talking about handouts, we're talking about empowering people to adapt. Imagine a community heavily reliant on a factory that suddenly shuts down because of a trade war. With UBI, people have a safety net to fall back on, allowing them time to explore new opportunities, maybe even start their own cooperative businesses that are less dependent on global supply chains.
Okay, imagine. I'm imagining everyone just sitting around collecting their UBI check and waiting for someone else to create those cooperative businesses. Where's the incentive to actually work?
The incentive is in improving their lives beyond the basic income auto. UBI provides a foundation, not a ceiling. People still want to earn more to contribute to build something. It's about freeing them from the desperation that forces them to accept exploitative or precarious jobs linked to these fragile global systems.
And there's evidence to suggest that UBI doesn't automatically lead to widespread work abandonment. Pilot programs have shown mixed results, but often people use the UBI to improve their education, start businesses, or simply work smarter, not less. We need to design UBI with the right incentives, maybe with tiered payments or job training programs attached.
Tiered payments? Job training? Sounds like we're just reinventing welfare with a fancier name. And those pilot programs, they're always in controlled environments, with limited scope. What happens when you scale it up to a national or even global level? The logistical nightmare alone.
It's a challenge, no doubt, but we can learn from existing social safety nets. Look at Social Security, unemployment benefits, food stamps. These are all forms of income support, and they've evolved over time. We can build on those systems, streamline them, and make them more universal and less stigmatizing.
Exactly. We need to look at the administrative costs, the potential for fraud, and the impact on inflation. We also need to consider different models. A universal basic service, for example, providing access to healthcare, education, and housing, could be another way to build resilience without the direct cash transfer.
Okay, universal basic services. So, instead of giving people money, we give them more bureaucracy? Sounds even less efficient. Who decides what services are basic? What if I don't want the government's healthcare? What if I want to send my kids to a private school?
Those are valid concerns, Otto, and it's about finding the right balance. A universal basic service model could complement a UBI, offering a baseline level of support while still allowing people the freedom to choose additional services. It's not about replacing individual choice, but about ensuring a minimum standard of living for everyone.
And let's not forget the geopolitical risk we mentioned earlier. Trade wars, sanctions, these disproportionately hurt the most vulnerable populations. A UBI could act as a shock absorber, mitigating the impact of those global events on local economies.
Okay, let's say India and Pakistan get into a full-blown conflict. How is UBI going to help when supply chains are completely disrupted and people are fleeing their homes? Seems like a band-aid on a gaping wound.
It's not a cure-all, but it provides immediate relief. People can use that money for food, shelter, transportation, medical supplies. It allows them to survive and start rebuilding their lives when the immediate crisis subsides. And in the long term, it can help build more stable, resilient societies that are less prone to conflict.
And consider the impact on international cooperation. If we're talking about a truly global approach to UBI, it could foster greater solidarity and interdependence between nations. Countries might be more hesitant to engage in trade wars or impose sanctions if they know it will negatively impact UBI recipients in other parts of the world.
International cooperation? You're dreaming. Look at what's happening with the WHO, the UN, everyone's pulling in different directions. The idea that we're going to get countries to agree on a global UBI scheme is laughable.
It's aspirational, I'll admit, but we need to start somewhere. Maybe it begins with regional agreements, pilot programs in developing countries, or even just increased funding for existing international aid programs. The point is to recognize that economic security is a global issue, and we need global solutions.
And the funding doesn't necessarily have to come solely from government coffers. We could explore innovative financing mechanisms like carbon taxes, wealth taxes, or even a small tax on international financial transactions. The possibilities are there. We just need the political will to explore them.
Oh, great, more taxes. That'll really boost the economy. Look, I'm not against helping people, but UBI just seems like a utopian fantasy that's completely disconnected from reality. We need practical solutions to fix our broken supply chains, not pie-in-the-sky schemes.
But what are those practical solutions, Otto? Are we just going to double down on the same neoliberal policies that have created these problems in the first place? More deregulation, more tax cuts for the wealthy? That hasn't worked so far.
I don't know. That's why I'm the skeptic here. I just don't see UBI as the answer. Maybe more targeted investments in infrastructure, education, and job training. Maybe stricter regulations on corporations that exploit workers and pollute the environment? I'm not sure, but I'm open to ideas that are grounded in reality.
And those are all important pieces of the puzzle. Infrastructure investments, education reforms, environmental regulations, these can all contribute to a more resilient and sustainable economy. But UBI can complement those efforts by providing a safety net for people who are displaced or left behind by those changes.
Yes, it's not an either situation. It's about creating a holistic approach that addresses both the symptoms and the root causes of economic insecurity. We need to fix the supply chains, and we need to ensure that people are protected when those supply chains inevitably break down.
So, we're back to the funding problem. How do we pay for all of this? Fix the supply chains, invest in infrastructure, education, and implement a UBI. Seems like we need to print money until it's worthless.
That's where careful economic modeling and policy design come in. We need to look at the long-term benefits of UBI, not just the upfront costs. A healthier, more educated, and more secure population is ultimately more productive and contributes more to the economy.
And think about the cost of not doing anything. The social costs of poverty, inequality, and economic insecurity are enormous. Crime, healthcare, social services, these all add up. UBI could potentially reduce those costs in the long run.
Maybe, but it's a big gamble. And what about inflation? If everyone has more money, won't prices just go up? We'll be back where we started, with people struggling to afford basic necessities.
That's a legitimate concern, and it's something that needs to be carefully monitored and addressed. We might need to consider price controls, anti-gouging laws, or even adjustments to the UBI payments themselves to account for inflation.
And we need to challenge the assumption that inflation is always a bad thing. A little bit of inflation can actually be good for the economy, encouraging spending and investment. The key is to keep it under control and ensure that wages keep pace with prices.
Easier said than done. I'm still skeptical, but I'm willing to keep an open mind. Maybe UBI is part of the solution, but it's definitely not the whole thing. We need a multifaceted approach that addresses the root causes of economic insecurity and strengthens our global supply chains.
Agreed. It's about finding the right mix of policies that work for our specific context. There's no one-size-fits-all solution, and we need to be willing to experiment, learn from our mistakes, and adapt our approach as we go along.
Exactly. It's a continuous process of learning, adapting, and innovating. Looking at Trump's tariffs on movies, for example, such a blunt instrument causing all sorts of unintended consequences to the global film industry, while a UBI might give those working in affected industries a chance to innovate and find new opportunities. It's about supporting people through these transitions.
Yeah, that movie tariff thing seems ill-conceived. Like, who even benefits from that? Except maybe, I don't know, nobody. Seems like a straight-up bad idea.
And look at the Obama Presidential Center situation. The allegations of woke construction and cost overruns, it highlights the importance of inclusive economic development. UBI could play a role in ensuring that these kinds of projects benefit everyone in the community, not just a select few.
That's a great point. It can also help address biases. a strong economic floor that UBI could enable people to take risks with new DEI initiatives, knowing they have at least a basic level of survival ensured, or even allow people to not be worried about taking a new construction job because it allows them the time to figure out the industry specifics.
All right. I see your point. Maybe there's something to this UBI thing after all. But I'm still not convinced it's the easy answer some people make it out to be.
No one said it would be easy, but the challenges we face are complex and multifaceted, and they require bold and innovative solutions. UBI is one such solution, and it's worth exploring further.
Absolutely. It's about building a more just equitable and resilient future for everyone, and that requires us to think outside the box and challenge the status quo. Thanks for joining us on UBI Unplugged.